I'm Maddie Reynolds, and this story starts the day I realized my brother's wedding wasn't just a celebration, it was a reckoning. When his fiancée mocked my dress like I was some charity case, I laughed until I saw my family smirking behind their wine glasses. That's when I knew I wasn't just excluded, I was targeted. But they chose the wrong girl to humiliate. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know, where are you watching this video from? Drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Charleston in the summer smells like jasmine and grilled corn, sweet and a little sharp. We were gathered in my parents' backyard for what was supposed to be a happy barbecue. Sunshine, paper lanterns, watermelon slices, and that syrupy southern charm my mom prides herself on. I'd worn a simple cotton sundress, sky blue with buttons down the front, my favorite from the local thrift boutique. Nothing fancy, just something that made me feel like me. Then she arrived, Celeste Beaumont, my brother Eric's fiancée, all legs, pearls, and power. She glided into the yard like she was descending a marble staircase at some Boston gala. Linen white dress, rosé already in hand, her golden hair tucked back with the kind of perfection that comes with generational money. The kind of woman who gets engagement rings passed down from ducal great-grandmothers. "Darling," she said, air-kissing my mom, "what a quaint setup." Quaint. In Charleston. For a family cookout. Eric trailed behind her, his eyes darting from her to me like a nervous referee. He looked good, too thin maybe, but polished. Ever since he'd met Celeste, he'd started ironing his polo shirts. We were all gathered near the grill when it happened. The moment, the one that split the air and drew lines I hadn't realized we were already standing on opposite sides of. Celeste turned to me, tilted her head like she was examining a puppy with mismatched eyes, and said, "Maddie, your dress is charming," in a thrift store sort of way. I didn't even blink. "At least I pay for my own clothes," I said, loud enough for the sizzle of the grill to pause. Silence. Pure, suffocating silence. My dad coughed. My cousin opened a beer too loudly. And Celeste, she just sipped her wine, her pinky elegantly arched, and smiled like I'd confirmed something she'd suspected all along. Eric, bless him, tried to break the tension with a too loud laugh. "Okay, let's not burn the burgers, huh?" But the air was already thick, like the moment before a thunderstorm. My mom gave me a look, not angry exactly, but wary, like I was the one causing a scene. And suddenly I wasn't standing in our backyard, I was standing on trial for being. What, honest, poorer, real? I smiled, but inside I was burning hotter than the coals in that grill. I wasn't embarrassed, not really. I was exposed, branded. They didn't see me as Maddie Reynolds, manager of the Oceanside Inn, the one who held our family together when Dad was sick and Eric was away at school. To them, I was just the sister with good intentions and bad fabric. But what Celeste didn't know, and what Eric seemed to have forgotten, is that I may not wear designer, but I know how to fight clean and play long. And this little backyard showdown, it was only the appetizer. That evening, the garden lights flickered on in slow intervals as the sun melted into the Charleston horizon, painting everything honey gold. The air buzzed with laughter and fireflies. My family drifted indoors in waves, Dad carrying empty plates, my aunt ushering the cousins upstairs, Eric helping Mom cover the grill. The buzz of the afternoon had dulled into polite murmurs and clinking glasses. I stayed on the porch. Partly because I didn't feel like playing hostess to people who'd silently cosigned Celeste's insult, and partly because the air felt clearer out here, among the night sounds and the soft rustle of hydrangeas near the steps. I leaned against the rail, arms crossed, watching a beetle struggle to land on the lantern. Then she appeared beside me. Celeste. No more pearls and champagne laughter, just the soft scuff of her sandals and the click of her bracelet as she adjusted it. She stood too close, the way women do when they want to unsettle you without raising their voice. "Maddie," she said, smooth and cool as her rosé had been, "I wanted to catch you alone." I didn't respond right away, let her fill the silence. "I realize earlier may have felt pointed," she continued, "but I actually admire how grounded you are, it's rare." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. That's when I knew. She wasn't trying to smooth things over. She was trying to bury me in compliments laced with warning. "I'll take that as a compliment," I said flatly. She sighed softly like she was carrying some great burden. Then, without looking at me, she said, "You don't need to worry about the wedding." My fingers tightened around the porch rail. What does that mean? It's going to be a very intimate affair. Private, traditional. My family has certain expectations, certain aesthetics we want to preserve. She turned her head then, finally meeting my eyes. Your presence would only confuse the guests. Confuse. Like I was a misfiled napkin or a toddler at a black tie gala. I stared at her. It's Eric's wedding. Celeste nodded once, her lips parting in a smile so thin it nearly vanished. Exactly. And with that, she turned and descended the steps with a dancer's grace, heading toward the waiting BMW at the curb where her parents sat in the backseat. Sipping from etched glasses like this was their estate. The taillights glowed red as they pulled away. I stood frozen. The hydrangeas swayed in the breeze beside me, blue and heavy with bloom. I remember thinking how ironic it was those flowers, so delicate-looking, could survive a hurricane. And here I was, wilting over one conversation. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't raised her voice. But somehow Celeste Beaumont had just uninvited me from my own brother's wedding. Not even with cruelty, with ease, as if removing me was a matter of elegance. I didn't know what to do. Confront Eric and risk sounding jealous. Complain to Mom and hear her sigh about keeping the peace. I was already labeled sensitive, dramatic. What would speaking up earn me now? So I just stood there in the porch shadows, silent. But my silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. Because sometimes the most powerful move isn't to argue. It's to wait, watch, and choose your moment to make sure they remember what it costs to erase someone like me. 2 weeks passed. Charleston's summer rolled on, humid, golden, endlessly polite. The kind of heat that settles in your bones and makes everything feel slower, like life's running through molasses. At the Oceanside Inn, we were always busy in July. Weddings, reunions, anniversaries, this was our high season. I loved it, honestly. The rhythm, the details, the way every event had a flow and fingerprint of its own. I'd managed the inn for 4 years now, ever since the previous GM moved to Savannah and left me the keys and a heap of half-fixed problems. It became mine. The place, the reputation, the staff. I'd sunk my whole self into it, which made what happened next hit even harder. It was a Tuesday, early afternoon, storm clouds bloating on the horizon. I was in my office on the 2nd floor, windows cracked just enough to let in the scent of salt and wet gardenias. I'd been reviewing invoices, floral vendors, catering sheets, linen rentals, making sure all the ducks were lined up for the weekend. Then I saw it. A fresh event order tucked into the stack, white envelope, gold lettering on the RSVP header, too fancy for our usual crowd. I opened it absently, another retirement party maybe, another couple renewing their vows. But no. The reservation form read, Client, Eric Beaumont event type, engagement celebration date, Friday, July 22 venue, Grand Oak Ballroom guest count, 110 menu, platinum tier special notes, private entrance requested. Champagne tower, monogrammed dessert plates. I froze. It was my brother's engagement party. At my hotel. And no one had told me. No invitation. No, hey Maddie, we'll be in your neck of the woods. No chance to prepare myself, emotionally or professionally, for the fact that every Beaumont and half the Charleston elite would be sipping champagne under my chandeliers. While I was, expected to stay hidden in my office like some servant, I stood up so fast my chair squeaked. Connor, I called, already halfway to the front desk. Connor, our youngest front desk manager, looked up from his screen with a sheepish smile. Hey, Maddie, who took this order? I asked, holding up the reservation printout. His smile faltered. Oh, that one. Mr. Beaumont's assistant came in last week. I didn't know he was your brother, honestly. Eric Beaumont, I repeated slowly. My last name is Reynolds. You didn't connect the dots, Connor blinked. I just followed protocol. They paid the deposit in full and said everything would be handled privately. I took a breath. Not his fault. Not really. But my hands still trembled slightly as I smoothed the paper. And it's confirmed. No changes, he nodded. They requested some pretty high-end extras. We had to bring in those French dessert trays from Atlanta. I glanced at the event calendar again. Friday, 3 days away. They were throwing a grand party right under my roof, and they hadn't even warned me, let alone invited me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and gave Connor a tight smile. Thank you. Can you make sure the staff has everything they need? I'll be overseeing prep personally. His eyebrows lifted. Of course, should I mention anything to the clients? No, I said, turning on my heel. Let's make sure it's perfect. I walked back to my office and closed the door quietly behind me. Perfect. That word echoed in my mind like a challenge, because if they thought they could erase me that easily, they didn't understand what it means to cross someone who owns the room. The night of the party came wrapped in humidity and high expectations. The grand oak ballroom had been transformed into something out of a society page spread. White orchids spilled out of tall vases. Every table gleamed with crystal and silver. Waiters in starched uniforms floated through the space, and soft jazz spilled from the grand piano near the window wall. It was breathtaking. And it was mine. I'd supervised every inch of this renovation 3 years ago. Chosen the fabrics, approved the chandeliers, even picked the music catalog the pianist was now pulling from. This was my house, which made what happened next all the more insulting. I arrived at the staff corridor wearing a navy silk dress, clean lines, modest neckline, a little more formal than usual, nothing flashy but tailored, respectable. I took the elevator down, bypassing the main lobby. I wasn't crashing. I wasn't sneaking. I was entering my place of business through my doors. But when I reached the corridor leading into the ballroom, a man stepped directly in front of me. He was tall, clean-shaven, tuxedo, earpiece, the kind of man who didn't look twice at the menu but had memorized every guest's name and the price of their cufflinks. "Private event," he said, voice clipped. "I'm Maddie Reynolds," I replied calmly, "general manager of the Oceanside Inn." He didn't blink. "I was told to allow guests only. And I'm telling you," I said, taking a measured step forward, "this is my property. I need to inspect the venue before dinner service begins." His hand came up, and then to my astonishment he pressed it against my shoulder and pushed. Not hard, but with clear intent, like I was a caterer's assistant who'd wandered off, like I wasn't just irrelevant, I was invisible. "I'm sorry," he said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. "I was given specific orders." My breath caught. Heat rushed to my ears. Orders. Of course he had orders. They hadn't just excluded me. They'd built a security plan around it. I took a step back and looked at him calmly. "You just assaulted me," I said evenly. "Touch me again and I'll have your badge pulled." He blinked, uncertain now. "I'm calling the police," I added, pulling out my phone. "And unless you want to explain to them why you just laid hands on the property manager of this entire venue, I suggest you get out of my way." The hallway went silent. He hesitated too long. I stepped aside and dialed. "Charleston PD," I said into the phone. "I'd like to report a physical obstruction on my property." As I spoke, the guard stepped back, clearly rattled. But it was too late. I wasn't just reclaiming a hallway, I was reclaiming my presence. 15 minutes later, 2 uniformed officers arrived. Calm, professional, not unkind. They took my statement, verified my ID. I heard one of them murmur something like, "She runs the place," to the other as they glanced around the perfectly dressed ballroom behind the doors. The taller officer turned to the bodyguard. "She has every right to enter and inspect the hotel premises," he said simply. I watched the man's face shift from smug to sullen. He stepped aside, and I walked in. The double doors opened into a glittering world. Laughter, glassware, the smell of butter and vanilla. I moved through the space slowly, eyes taking in the scene, the guests, the light bouncing off the chandeliers. And then I saw him, Eric. He was standing near the head table, laughing at something a man in a velvet jacket had said until his eyes met mine. His smile collapsed. "Maddie," he said, stepping forward. Across the room, Celeste turned sharply. Her expression darkened, but I didn't flinch. I walked further into the ballroom, cool and unshaken, as if I were simply checking a thermostat or adjusting the lights. As if my heart wasn't thudding in my chest like a warning drum. Because if they wanted a performance, I was just getting started. "Maddie," Eric's voice split through the music, a note of disbelief riding the polished edge of cocktail chatter. Heads turned. It was the kind of name drop that doesn't need a last name. Not in a room this curated. Not when everyone had been told who wasn't invited. I saw the ripple, eyebrows rising, conversations halting, napkins paused mid-fold. I let it all land. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I simply walked forward, the soft click of my low heels swallowed by the thick carpet I'd approved 2 renovation budgets ago. The one they all complimented as elegantly neutral. Funny. That's how they wanted me to be, elegant and neutral. Preferably invisible. Across the room, near the champagne tower, Celeste froze. Her arm was still looped through Eric's, her body angled toward the photographers in the far corner. When she turned to see me, her expression morphed from confusion to calculation. The smile she wore flickered, then fell entirely. "Maddie," Eric said again, stepping toward me, his voice barely above a whisper now. I didn't know." His words hit something soft in me, but I couldn't afford softness right now. Celeste beat him to the next move. She dropped his arm like it burned her and approached me in a storm of perfume and pearls. "What is she doing here?" She hissed to no one in particular. I faced her squarely. "The party is over." The words didn't echo, but they carried. They landed. One man at the nearest table blinked and looked at his wife. A woman setting down her wineglass half stood, unsure whether to resume eating or reach for her clutch. Celeste's mouth opened, but I cut her off. "My staff was unlawfully obstructed from accessing hotel property tonight," I said calmly, projecting without yelling. "A private security detail blocked entrance to the ballroom, which violates both safety and service protocols. Charleston PD has now documented the incident, and until the report is cleared, all events in this space are suspended." Gasps didn't come, but silences did. A room full of people suddenly very alert. "This is a family misunderstanding," Celeste said too loudly. "You're making it into something public. Your security guard physically restrained me outside my own ballroom," I said. "That's not a misunderstanding, that's assault." "Eric," she snapped, turning toward him. "Are you going to let her hijack our night?" He didn't answer. The pianist stopped playing. A note hung awkwardly in the air before being swallowed by the tension. I walked further into the room. The hotel's event policy is clear. Insubordination of staff or restriction of access is grounds for immediate termination of service. I have the right and responsibility to shut this down. "You can't," she said, voice rising. "You have no idea how much we paid." "This isn't about money," I said. "It's about respect. And you forfeited that the moment you decided I wasn't good enough to stand in this room." Servers, previously frozen, glanced at me. I nodded once. Start clearing. Napkins were folded, wine glasses lifted. The pianist quietly closed his lid. Celeste spun toward the crowd, desperate now. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, this will all be sorted out in a moment. My fiancée's sister is clearly under some stress." I held up the reservation slip, the original contract signed by Eric Beaumont. "This event was scheduled under false pretenses and carried out in deliberate secrecy on a property you do not own. And you denied staff access while trying to deny my existence." "Maddie," Eric stepped forward. His voice was gentler now. "I didn't approve the security part. I didn't know she told them to block you." Celeste turned on him. "Are you seriously going to take her side right now?" I didn't wait for the answer. To the room, I said clearly, "You're welcome to enjoy your evening elsewhere, but this event is concluded." One woman, older, pearls, powdery makeup, stood up and gave me a quiet nod as she passed. "Well said," she murmured. Guests began rising. Awkward, scattered, but steady. The way people leave a wedding they know won't end in vows. Celeste's face twisted. "You have no idea what you've done," she spat. "This is social suicide." I looked her in the eye. "For who?" The last word barely passed her lips before she stormed away, heels stabbing the carpet as if she could pierce the foundation I had built with every step. I didn't follow. I simply stood there as my staff moved swiftly, respectfully, clearing away what remained of a party that had tried to erase me. No longer hiding. No longer asking for space. I had taken it. The ballroom emptied with a hush, like the tide slipping out without a splash. Just the rustle of silk dresses, murmured excuses, and the occasional clink of a wayward glass. My staff moved efficiently, rolling away carts. Clearing tables like this was any other event, because to them it was. But to me, it felt like standing in the eye of a storm I had finally stopped pretending wasn't there. I remained near the double doors, arms relaxed but mind sharp. My dress, though simple, clung to me like armor now. The weight of what I'd done hadn't hit me yet. Maybe it wouldn't. Eric had vanished, likely chasing Celeste. The Beaumont entourage, however, lingered. You could tell who they were without name tags, impeccable posture, silver accents, that glossy ease of people who never question whether a room belongs to them. And among them was Arthur Beaumont, Celeste's father. He approached me with a smile that looked expensive, the kind of smile that never truly touches the eyes. "Miss Reynolds," he said smoothly, extending a manicured hand. "I imagine this evening has been quite stressful for you." I didn't shake his hand. He retracted it without missing a beat. "I understand there's been a bit of a misunderstanding," he continued, tone silky. "Tempers flared, lines blurred, but surely there's a way for us to resolve things amicably." I tilted my head. "Amicably," he nodded once. "Celeste may have overstepped. She's passionate about detail, very particular about presentation, you see, but she meant no harm. And Eric, of course, would never intentionally disrespect you." "Yet here we are," I said. Arthur chuckled softly. "Indeed, well, I believe in solutions, practical ones." He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a small leather checkbook. My stomach turned before the pen even touched paper. He flipped it open like it was a menu. "I'd like to offer you a gesture of goodwill," he said. "A sum to thank you for your professionalism, and to ensure there are no lingering hard feelings that might affect future partnerships." I stared at him. "Future partnerships? The Beaumonts entertain often," he replied. "We'd hate for one unfortunate evening to sour an otherwise beneficial relationship with the Oceanside Inn." There it was. Not an apology, not even a request for forgiveness, just a bribe dressed in etiquette. He filled in the amount quickly, neat numbers, no hesitation, then slid the check toward me on the edge of a white dessert plate. It was blank. The number field, empty. The message was clear: "Name your price." I looked down at it, then back at him. "You're offering to pay me off. I'm offering to smooth things over. And you think money's the way to do that?" He smiled again. "Money tends to resolve a great deal, especially when emotions are involved." I picked up the check slowly, held it in my hand, then folded it once neatly and handed it back to him. "This isn't about money, Mr. Beaumont," I said evenly. "It's about respect." He studied me, his expression unreadable for a beat. Then he gave a slow, calculated nod. "Very well," he said, "but I do hope you'll consider how these kinds of actions reflect on a business. Reputation, after all, is currency too." "My reputation is built on integrity," I said, "not silence." He tucked the checkbook away. "As you wish." With that, he turned and walked toward the remaining cluster of Beaumonts, murmuring something as he passed a woman who'd been watching me like a hawk. They filed out soon after, their departure as quiet as their entrance had been grand. I stood alone for a moment longer in the dimming lights, surrounded by empty chairs and half-melted candles. It should have felt hollow. It didn't. It felt clean. The hotel was silent by the time I slipped off my shoes. It was just past midnight, and my office upstairs still glowed faintly through the window. I didn't go back in. I couldn't. My hands were still buzzing from adrenaline. My skin smelled faintly of gardenia and tension. Instead, I walked barefoot across the tile lobby to the private entrance that led up to my apartment above the front desk. The same apartment I'd moved into when I took over the Oceanside. Back then, it had felt like a temporary arrangement, just until I figured things out. But now, this place was home. Every creak in the staircase, every uneven spot in the banister, I knew them all. I had grown into this space like a second skin. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the small sofa beneath the window that overlooked the empty garden terrace. The moonlight hit the iron chairs just right, making them look like little thrones abandoned after a feast. My phone buzzed on the side table. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, persistent, sharp. The screen lit up with her name, Celeste. I should have silenced it, blocked her, but I didn't. I let it ring one more time, then answered. "I see you're not sleeping," I said calmly. Her voice came through like a spark off a cold blade. "You're pathetic." I said nothing. "You had your little scene, your public tantrum. Congratulations," she spat. "You've humiliated your brother, made a joke of our engagement. You think this is a win." I took a slow sip of water. I didn't do anything in secret. Oh, please, she snapped. You've always resented me, from the second Eric introduced us. Not true, I said, still calm. I was happy he found someone until that someone decided I was a threat to her narrative. There was a beat of silence. You think Eric will choose you over me, she hissed, quieter now. He won't. He needs a partner, not a charity case sister playing hotel manager. My heart clenched, but not from the insult. From the fear behind it, because for the first time I heard it clearly, she was afraid. Then why, I asked softly, do I hear fear in your voice right now? That silenced her. I didn't gloat, I didn't push. I let the stillness sit between us like proof. She exhaled sharply. You're delusional. No, I said, just done pretending. You'll regret this, she snapped. I already regretted staying silent for so long. A long pause followed. Then, finally, she said the one thing I expected least. He'll come back to me, you'll see. People like you always end up alone. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. People like me, we don't end up alone, we end up surrounded by people who don't need us to disappear to shine. She hung up. I stared at the screen for a moment longer before setting the phone down. The silence afterward was delicious. Not lonely, not empty, just mine. I curled up on the sofa, still in my navy dress, and let the quiet of my hotel seep into me like peace I didn't know I'd been starving for. Let her scream into her empty room. Let her clutch her pearls and her pride. I had already won the only thing that mattered, myself, back in my own skin. The next evening, the rain came slow and steady, drumming against the windows like a lullaby for a city too proud to pause. I had the fire going, just a modest one in the old brick hearth built into the corner of my apartment, and a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, though the air wasn't cold. It was more for comfort, for grounding. The day had been uneventful in the best way. Guests checked in and out without drama. The staff, though wide-eyed in the morning, had relaxed by afternoon. No one asked questions. No one whispered about the night before, but there was a weight in my chest I couldn't quite exhale. I kept thinking about Eric. I hadn't heard from him, not a call, not a text, not even a sheepish knock at my office door. He'd been silent, maybe stuck in the whirlwind Celeste was likely conjuring with every ounce of venom left in her. Still, I'd hoped. And then just after 8, my phone lit up again. Mom, I answered on the second ring. Hi, sweetheart, she said, her voice softer than usual, cautious. Hey, Mom. I didn't want to call too soon, she added. I figured you might need space, but something happened. My stomach clenched, but I kept my tone light. What happened? Well, she exhaled, Eric came by the house today, just showed up around lunch. My hand tightened around the phone. Is he okay? She paused. He looked like he hadn't slept, like someone who'd just gotten off a roller coaster that never stopped. Did he say anything? He did more than say, she replied quietly. He packed a bag, told Celeste's parents he was done. I sat up straighter, the blanket sliding off my shoulders. What? He told them, she continued, her voice shaking just slightly, that he couldn't marry someone who tried to erase his sister from his life. He said, and I quote, that letting you be humiliated like that was the lowest moment of his life. I blinked hard, staring at the fire. He left the Beaumont estate, drove straight here. He's staying in the guest room tonight. For a second, I didn't know what to say. Then, did he say what happened after the party? He didn't get into details, just said Celeste tried to spin it, told him you were being petty, that you were trying to sabotage the engagement, but he didn't believe her anymore. I swallowed a lump in my throat. He said you stood your ground, Mom continued, and that it made him realize he hasn't in a long time. He cried, Maddie. That boy sobbed into your father's shoulder. The image hit me like a wave. Eric, my brother, my once best friend, sobbing like a child who just remembered who he used to be. I pressed my hand over my eyes. I think, Mom said gently, that he finally saw what kind of woman he was about to marry, and what kind of sister he already had. We sat in silence for a few seconds, the fire popping in the background. You okay? She asked finally. I nodded even though she couldn't see it. Yeah, I think I am. Well, she said, he wants to come by tomorrow. If you're open to it. I am. We ended the call and I set the phone down carefully beside the fire. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back against the couch and watched the flames dance in the hearth, their soft light flickering across the walls like a heartbeat. I thought about all the dinners, all the holidays, all the years where I'd felt like I was standing just outside the circle, close enough to feel the warmth but not invited to sit. And now the circle had cracked open. Not because I asked nicely, but because I stopped asking at all, because I stood up, because I let them see me. And now, finally, they were starting to. 2 days later, I found myself standing in front of the Charleston Club's private dining room, staring at a door I didn't want to walk through. It was oak, thick, polished like a courtroom bench. Inside, 2 families waited, one of blood, one of contracts and monograms. I adjusted my blazer, a soft dove gray one I hadn't worn in years, and smoothed my skirt. Then I knocked once and opened the door. They were all seated already. Eric had insisted I come. "Please," he'd said the night before when we met on the garden terrace behind the hotel. "I need you there. I need them to see I'm not backing down." So I came. Inside, the room was stifling, not from heat, but tension. The long mahogany table gleamed under a chandelier shaped like a blown glass storm cloud. At one end sat Arthur and Vivian Beaumont, his gold cufflinks flashing, her wine glass untouched. At the other end, my parents, hands folded too tightly in their laps. Eric stood in the center. When I entered, his shoulders straightened. "Maddie," he said, motioning to the empty chair beside him. "Thanks for coming." I nodded once, slipped into the seat. Celeste was to his left, pristine as ever in a white sheath dress, her expression unreadable. She didn't greet me, didn't blink. A waiter poured sparkling water. No one touched it. Arthur cleared his throat. "Well, we're here now. I trust we can all move past the confusion." Eric didn't sit. He stayed standing, both hands braced on the back of his chair. "I asked for this dinner," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "because I need everyone here to hear what I'm about to say, clearly all at once." The room stilled. "I've spent the last few weeks caught between 2 worlds," he continued, "trying to be enough for both. But that stops now." He looked at Celeste, then at her parents. "I can't marry someone who treats my sister like garbage." Celeste inhaled sharply. The room didn't gasp, it recoiled. Arthur leaned forward. "Eric." "No," Eric said, holding up a hand. "Don't interrupt me. I've made excuses for too long, for Celeste, for all of this. But I watched the woman who helped raise me get shoved out of her own hotel, and I didn't say a thing. I stood there like a coward. Hate myself for that." His voice cracked, but he didn't falter. "I thought love was about compromise, but this isn't compromise. This is cruelty, disguised as taste, disguised as etiquette." Celeste's jaw clenched. "You'd throw me away for her," she said suddenly, cold fury threading every syllable. Eric didn't look at her. He looked down for a moment, then straightened, eyes locked on some invisible point just past the chandelier. "No," he said, "not for her." A pause, then, "for myself." The words landed like a gavel. "I'm done shrinking to fit this picture," he added. "If that means walking away from a wedding plan down to the last flower stem, so be it." He stepped back from his chair, unclipping the cufflinks Celeste had given him for his birthday. He laid them gently on the table. "I want a life that doesn't require me to ignore my conscience." Celeste sat perfectly still, her lips barely parted, but something in her gaze broke just slightly. A flicker, a fault line. Arthur shifted. "Son, let's be reasonable." "I'm not your son," Eric said calmly. "And I'm done being reasonable when people like Maddie are treated like noise in their own home." He turned toward me. His voice dropped. "I'm sorry," I swallowed hard. "I should have stood up for you earlier," he said. "I will from now on." No one moved. No one spoke. Eric reached for my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. Then he turned and walked out, and this time, I walked with him. No one stopped us. Not Celeste. Not Arthur. Not even my parents, who stood quietly and followed behind like they'd just witnessed the only real ceremony that mattered. We exited into the thick, humid Charleston night, the air clinging to our skin like truth that refused to wash off. Behind us, the silence of the ruined dinner echoed louder than any toast ever could. The doors to the Charleston Club swung shut behind us, the wood heavy, final. It was the kind of sound that normally went unnoticed, just a door closing. But not tonight. Tonight it sounded like a verdict. Eric and I walked side by side down the stone steps, our footsteps oddly in sync. Neither of us spoke. Not yet. The humid night wrapped around us like steam rising from old wounds, clinging to our clothes and clamping the air between our words. Behind us, we could still hear murmurs, chairs scraping, confused shuffling, a world trying to put itself back together after something inside it cracked. And then I heard it. A voice, Arthur Beaumont's, low and sharp. "You're making a mistake, Eric." We paused. Eric turned first, his jaw clenched, his eyes no longer soft. Then I turned too. The doors were propped slightly open again, enough that a few of the Beaumonts had stepped onto the threshold as if still trying to pull Eric back into place with sheer presence. Arthur stepped forward. "You'll regret this," he said. "You're throwing away your future over one outburst. Do you really think this performance, won't follow you?" I tilted my head, letting the words sink in, their chill clashing with the summer heat. Vivian Beaumont chimed in next, her voice thin with disapproval. "You could have spoken privately. This spectacle wasn't necessary." Celeste was silent, still inside, watching probably, measuring the damage like she was still deciding whether it was salvageable. Eric took a breath. I felt him brace himself. But this time I didn't let him speak first. I took a step forward. The gravel crunched beneath my heels, the night holding its breath. "You built a wedding on cruelty," I said evenly, locking eyes with Arthur. "Don't expect it to stand." A few of them flinched. Not from volume, I hadn't raised my voice, but from the weight behind it, the finality. "I tried to be quiet," I added. "I tried to be polite, but there's a funny thing about silence. It protects the powerful far more than the honest." Arthur started to speak, but I kept going. "I watched you all treat my brother like a token, a placeholder for your daughter's picture-perfect life. And I watched you decide, without ever saying it out loud, that I wasn't welcome, that I was something to be managed, edited out like an old stain on a perfect dress." Vivian's lips parted slightly, as if shocked that I'd name what they all did in whispers. "You didn't just underestimate me," I said. "You tried to erase me." I stepped back now, closer to Eric. "And now," I added, "you get to live with the consequence of who you pushed out and who you pushed away." Celeste finally appeared in the doorway then, as if pulled by gravity, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her expression was blank, but her eyes burned. "Maddie," she said softly, almost sweetly, "you think this is justice, that this ends with a neat little bow?" I didn't smile, but my voice stayed calm. "No, this isn't justice, it's balance." Then I reached for Eric's hand. And together we turned. We walked out into the night, down the steps, across the drive, past the polished town cars lined like soldiers along the curb. No one followed. The stars above were soft and blurred, the way they always looked in Charleston in summer, too far away to touch but not too far to notice. And in that moment I didn't need justice or bows or second-hand apologies. I had something better. Clarity. And it looked a lot like the way Eric smiled quietly as he opened the car door for me, like someone who'd finally remembered who he was. 3 days after the dinner, the hotel felt lighter. It wasn't anything obvious. The chandeliers still sparkled the same way. The check-in bell still gave the same cheerful ding. But the air felt different, as if the place itself had exhaled. Maybe because I hadn't heard from the Beaumonts. Not a call, not an email. Not even a veiled legal threat, which I half expected. That silence was its own kind of closure. Not dramatic, just empty, like the last embers of a fire that burned through everything flammable. I watered the garden outside my apartment early that morning, letting the sun warm my bare arms. The rosemary needed pruning, and the basil was bolting again. Nothing urgent, just the quiet rhythm of life reasserting itself. I just stepped inside when my phone buzzed. Eric. I let it ring once before picking up. "Hey," I said, voice light. "Hey," he replied, his tone low and steady. "You got a minute?" "Always." A pause. "I've been thinking about what you said. All of it," he continued. "At the club, at the hotel, even before that." He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see things clearly." There was no performance in his voice, no rehearsed lines, just the raw sound of someone admitting they'd failed someone they loved. "I know I let her treat you like dirt," he went on, "and I made excuses for it because it was easier than facing what that said about me, but you were right, all the things you said, you were right." I sank into the chair by the window, letting his words settle. "You stood up for yourself," I said softly. "That's all I ever wanted." I should have done it sooner. You did it when it mattered. Another pause, quieter this time. Then, Mom keeps saying the same thing, he said, a trace of a laugh in his voice. That you were the only one acting with a backbone. I smiled at that. She say it with her "I told you so" tone. Absolutely. We laughed, not loud, not long, but it was the first real laugh we'd shared in weeks. Do you think we'll be okay? He asked. I think we're already better than we were, I said. The hard part's over. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a month. Good, he said, because I miss you. I'm right here. I know, he said, but it's different now. I'm seeing it. We didn't say goodbye right away. We just let the silence hang, comfortable now, not heavy, like the kind of quiet you don't rush to fill. After we hung up, I sat there a while longer, watching the sunlight creep across the hardwood floor, tracing shapes like stories untold. And I thought about how strange it was. That peace doesn't always arrive with fanfare or forgiveness wrapped in ribbon. Sometimes it comes as a phone call. Sometimes it sounds like "I miss you." Sometimes it's just a morning where the basil still needs trimming, and the world doesn't feel so sharp. And in that moment, it was enough. 6 months later, Charleston had settled into one of those dreamy southern autumns that tourists imagine but only locals understand, when the air cools just enough to breathe again. But the flowers haven't gotten the message yet. My garden outside the apartment was still blooming with late lavender and stubborn daisies. It didn't feel like fall. It felt like beginning again. Eric texted me that morning. Bringing someone to Sunday dinner, hope you're okay with it. She bakes. I laughed into my coffee. As long as she doesn't bring drama, she's welcome. He replied with a winking emoji and nothing else. By the time the table was set, the sun had dipped behind the oaks, and my parents were already sitting on the porch, sipping sweet tea from the heavy glasses we never used unless it was a full family meal. Then I heard it. A soft knock. I opened the door, and there they were. Eric, hair longer than it used to be, sunburned at the edges like someone who spent more time outdoors now. And beside him, a woman with dark curls pinned loosely behind her ears and flour still dusted lightly across her sleeve. Hi, she said, voice warm and easy. I'm Lee. I smiled. Lee. She didn't try too hard, didn't overcompliment the house or wear pearls or offer her entire resume in the first 60 seconds. She just handed me a linen-covered basket and said, "It's sourdough, still warm, I hope." I pulled the cloth back and blinked. The scent hit me instantly, homey, nostalgic, real. "It smells amazing," I said honestly. "You're already our favorite," Lee laughed. "Don't tell him that yet." We sat outside, just like we used to when we were kids, me, Eric, Mom, and Dad, but now with Lee tucked naturally between us like she'd always belonged. There was no posturing, no forced small talk. Just easy stories, jokes that came and went like fireflies, and the occasional clink of forks against plates. After dinner, Lee and I stood side by side at the sink rinsing dishes, sleeves rolled up, arms occasionally bumping. "She's really something," I said over my shoulder as Eric walked past with a pitcher. He grinned. "I know." He didn't say more. He didn't have to. Later, when the night cooled and the porch lights flickered on, Lee sat beside me on the swing, holding a second glass of tea. Her voice was low. "Eric told me about everything," she said. "Not just the engagement, but the way things played out, the hotel, the dinner, all of it." I tensed slightly, not out of shame, but muscle memory. "I just wanted to say," she added, "that if someone had done that to my brother, I wouldn't have just ended the engagement. I'd have flipped the whole table." I turned toward her slowly. She gave a small shrug. "But I guess you did that already, just with more style." We both laughed. And in that moment, I felt it. That click. That elusive thing you hope for in a family gathering, not politeness, not performance, but peace. This wasn't a replacement for what was lost. It was something new, something earned. As the cicadas hummed in the dark and the porch light cast soft gold across the brick, I leaned back and let myself enjoy the quiet. No scheming. No power games. No long shadows cast by old names. Just bread warm from the oven. Just tea on the porch. Just laughter rising like a promise kept. And somewhere inside me, I knew, family isn't inherited, it's made.